Good morning, welcome back. This is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. On my immediate right is Bill Okero, former Mandera County Senator and political economist. Good morning. Lovely having you here on the broadcast. Odhiambo Ramogi is an economist and the Chief Executive Officer of Elim Capital, as well as Dr. Makali Mulu, who is the Member of Parliament representing Kitui Central Constituency, an economist by profession and a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. Shortly, we'll be joined by Dr. Abraham Rugo, who is the Executive Director, Budget Hub, to put into perspective the state of the economy, given what's been happening in the country. Gentlemen, let's begin with a look at the front pages of the publications. The Daily Nation says things fall apart and they cite major crises facing key sectors of the economy. The devolved units, the 47 counties that have threatened to shut down operations, citing cash crunch, critical sectors of education, healthcare, as well as the lecturers' strike that has paralyzed learning in public universities. First, beginning with you, Honorable Bill Okero, is the state of the economy as dire as the papers have highlighted this morning?
Well, I think there is a problem with the state of the economy. It's no doubt it's not good. The government is facing serious cash crunch. And you can see that playing out in the various government institutions not getting resources that have been budgeted for or resources that have been appropriated for. Clearly, there is, you might say, yes, papers really, of course, put very bold headlines on these things, but I think there's no doubt that the economy is bad. But we blame the government for speaking from the two sides of their mouth. Yeah. 1 minute saying that the economy is now stable. The macroeconomic indicators are all positive. We're out of the woods. We're doing well. Then the next minute, the same government says, oh, the economy is in a bad shape. We don't have money to pay for this. We don't have money to pay for that. So it's still the same government that is shooting itself in the foot. I mean, there's no consistency by the government itself on matters of the economy, what the status of the economy is. I think that itself is a challenge.
Yeah. And Odhiambo, given the reflections given by the state on the inflation numbers that they have given vis-a-vis the commoner's perspective of how he sees the economy, thinning pay slips and disposable incomes that are shrinking, which outweighs the other?
Let me start by saying I am in the private sector. I think the only other person in the private sector on this bench is Honorable Bill Okero. And in the private sector, long before the results come, or the figures, the statistics come from central bank, you already feel it in real time, whether the economy is doing well or it's not doing well. You feel it when you have clients buying your products and services or otherwise. And the state of affairs is such that small businesses are struggling because people do not have money to buy. Ordinarily, when government has money, and I think Mheshimiwa has said it, this money is spent. And when this money is spent, then it circulates in the economy. And then Mwananchi gets this money and buys using this money. If government agencies are struggling to get money, then you can imagine how much Mwananchi will struggle to also access resources to buy from the private sector. Coming back to your question on inflation, you see, we have a double-edged sword in terms of the inflation numbers. The inflation numbers have come down to 2.72% in October of 2024, which is a good thing. It's not as bad as it was a few months back. But at the same time, we have interest rate which is still at 12%, okay, which means then that any person in the private sector who wants to access credit, it is too expensive. And so that means that there is no money. So by the time you're telling Mwananchi that the price of unga has fallen from 200 to say 140, yeah. I had them say the other day it's 8 above. I'm wondering where it's 8 above. But assuming it's 140, it is still expensive to him because he still doesn't have income or he doesn't have money. So I agree that the state of affairs is not as good as it looks. There are many factors to it, but it's not as good as, as they are trying to say.
Okay. Dr. Makali Mulug, you sit at the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and there have been series of reports and advice, especially from the critical offices that include the Parliamentary Budget Office, on the impact of high taxation and the lacking jobs within which decent incomes are there, then a proper taxation regime can be instituted. Is the real reality what the government is projecting of the economy?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I agree with what my colleagues have said. And the question is, you know, there is what we call the real economy and the economy on paper. The question is what, for me, I think what is good is what I would call economy on paper, not the real economy. Every weekend we are interacting with the Wananchi down there, and I can tell you for sure, normally when you meet a Wananchi, they will tell you, Jambo Mheshimiwa, how are you doing? These days, the first thing you shake their hand, they ask you, uchumi ya Ruto inakupeleka namna gani? Now it has become Ruto's economy. It's not Kenyan uchumi, it's Ruto's economy. And I can tell you for sure, things are not working well. Anybody who is going to tell us that things are working well, I think doesn't live in this country. The reality is that, while in terms of figures and statistics, things might be projected to look good, things on ground are different. I want to give you a very good example. Look at the inflation, the so-called 2.7, which seems to be very, very, people are happy talking about it, and more so the government officers saying we are doing very well, inflation has come down to 2.7%. And I was asking myself, as an economist, when inflation comes down, what should be happening? People should be buying more because prices are low and all those things. But in reality, when you look at what is happening, I think the reason these figures are where they are today is because there's no demand for goods and services. We have suppressed our aggregated demand, so that things are there, but people are not buying because they have no money in their pockets. And normally, any basic economic student, 101 economics, demand and supply. When the supply is there and the demand is not there, prices will always come down. So we are not saying that nothing has been done to push the food prices down. Something has been done. Yeah. But we are saying we are in a state of stagnation because the demand is not there. And when the demand is not there, then automatically the figures will look good, but in reality, we are suppressing demand. And when that happens, there are a number of problems. The other thing is the private sector. I'm happy that you have two people in the private sector here. Look at the credit to the private sector. When interest rates are coming down, we would expect that credit to private sector is increasing every day. That people are getting more money loans from the banks. But if you look at the statistics, I think the figures are going down. They will confirm in the private sector that now credit to the private sector is no longer increasing, it's actually decreasing. Yeah. And that has serious implications because what happens is once the private sector is not borrowing more from the banks, then it means there are about three which will happen. The first one, their business will not grow because they're not investing more. The second thing is employment will suffer because they're likely to be laying off people. And we have heard of companies who have laid people off in this country. People have been told, go home, we cannot hire you anymore. And then the worst bit, when you shrink the private sector, it impacts negatively on the revenue collection. Okay. These are things we cannot run away from.
Okay. Dr. Abraham Rugo, okay. You point out three critical factors we'll be expounding on us in the course of this broadcast. But Dr. Abraham Rugo, from the government's explanation of the 2.7% inflation, are they in hindsight also deliberately ignoring the aspect about the shrinking purchasing power and the disposable income that Kenyans can no longer spend, therefore reduction in spending, as to why then the inflation could be down? Is there a correlation between the two that the government has ignored?
Yeah, I think and I appreciate it, and my apologies for coming in late. We need to connect. You see, the assumption that all these things are not connected, I think is really fallacious. All these things are connected. So just some context. First of all, you have COVID, the number of companies that actually lay off, people, but also the number of companies that shut down, especially family-owned businesses. There was a study that approximated about 1.7 million small and micro enterprises did close down. Then you come out of COVID, a lot of those businesses actually do not revamp back. As a matter of fact, when they're trying to revamp back, they find more obstacles. Two, the incomes of those who are salaried are not adjusted upwards. So in other words, if you work out the inflation, which basically is, if you argue, the depreciation, if you had 100 shillings in 2020, it simply means that that same 100 shilling you have today can only perhaps purchase goods for you that are worth maybe 80-something shillings. So that already happens. Then on top of that, you introduce new taxes. Remember, in the last 3 years, we have had a mix of different new taxes, whether it's on petroleum, then you introduce the housing levy, and in the last 1 year, you shove off about 4.25%, if you include plus the share deductions that have just begun. All that cumulatively, in a context where we also run another a social safety net. Anybody who has an income, a regular income, also supports other families who also pay tax in that sense. So when you put all these things together, it means that even when inflation is down, people are not able to buy goods and services. And how do we see this? KRA has pronounced itself on the numbers. And what you realize is that all the income-driven taxes are going down. Income tax, which is income related, in other words, people are not remitting their tax, not because they don't want to remit their taxes, but because they don't have the money. Two, VAT. VAT is your biggest indicator, of consumption, because VAT is tied to specific goods and services, that people are purchasing. But even with that whole context, we also are not factoring, and then that government in this period has also emerged as, of course, governments are some of the key players within their economies, but government is the one taking credit. What Makali is talking about, the credit that, the fall of credit uptick by private sector, the credit that is not going to private sector, if you do the math, also you notice government has been borrowing quite heavily, from the local, from domestically, at 16%, at 18%. So as a private actor, you go in there and you are given that same loan at 21%, at 20%. What business can you do that will give you at 21% to recover your money, your sunk costs, and at the same time be able to make a profit? So I think it's a connection of, and I wish that there can be an appreciation that these things are interconnected. That you just don't look at one number, 2.7%, and say all is well. You don't just look at one number of, how much that you have not defaulted on your loans, and then say all is well. What is the cost, of that?
All right. When we get back from the break, gentlemen, a lot is happening, including the labor unrests and what this communicates of the economy, given what the IMF also said, tying the conditionality aspect of promotion of good governance to the latest batch of money, which more or less is meant to address the question of corruption, the glowing picture of the economic growth that the government has painted vis-a-vis the struggles of the common man, as well as the struggle and the transition to the new social health authority, and what the head of state yesterday spoke about as the naysayers who he said that his administration will prove them wrong. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422. We are back with more after the break. Stay tuned.